about diseases in general and classified them. We've talked about how they're caused by 5 different kinds of pathogens. There's 5 routes of transmission and 5 kind of ways we classify how they're affecting a population. Then we dug into then we dug into viruses and learned about one particular kind of scary, interesting virus and watched a movie about it. Now let's cover bacteria. Oh, and we told the story of prions. I forgot the crazy cannibalism story. So let's talk about bacteria. Although if we're going to talk about bacteria, we're going to have to spend more time on good than bad. We tend to think of bacteria as, stuff that makes you sick. That's a very small slice of the pie. First of all, you know them by their classification, right? We talked about the 6 kingdoms. 99.9999% of the bacteria you encounter are in one of those kingdoms, right? Because the archaea are in weird places that still look like the early Earth. Eubacteria are the ones we're talking about. And so the ways we classify them have to do with their shape, first of all. And some of the basic names of the most common bacteria have to do with both their shape and the way they group themselves. So the basic shapes of bacteria, there's 3. There's spherical, there's rod shape, or to me they look like little sausages, and then there's spiral. So we have words for those. The spherical ones, we use the word ending coccus, C-O-C-C-U-S. Rod-shaped ones, we use the word bacillus. And the spiral ones, it's sterillum. And if that doesn't sound familiar, it's because mostly you probably know them by the prefixes we use, and these are the word endings. The prefixes are what tell you about grouping. So for example, a lot of bacteria like to group themselves like a chain, almost like a string of beads. And we use the prefix strepto for those. Sound familiar? Yeah, so strep throat is caused by one of the many streptococcus bacteria out there. So just from that name, you know that streptococcus is going to be a spherical bacteria that likes to group itself in chains. Other bacteria like to group themselves in little clusters. They look like little bunches of grapes. We use the prefix staphylo for those. Does that sound familiar? Any wrestlers? Yeah. So staph infection, yep. Because wrestlers are often getting like scrapes on mats that are full of bacteria. They have to worry about that. Saved a kid's life once. He was a wrestler. I don't know if I really saved his life, but he came up and he was like, showed me his shoulders, like, Sandra, this thing really hurts. I don't know what it is. I said, go to the doctor today, because that looks like a bacterial infection. And he came back 2 days later. He's like, the doctor said you might have saved my life. If we hadn't caught that, it could have killed me. I don't know if that's true, but it's not something to mess with when you've got an open wound and it starts to get real red and nasty looking for the doctor. Finally, we can classify them by their cell walls. This is the one that's most important when someone finds a bacterial sample that has made someone sick. What we really want to know right off the bat, is it gram-positive or gram-negative? That's because we have this particular kind of stain we call gram stain. And if you dunk a bacterium in it, 2 things can happen. 1, it'll turn purple, or 2, it'll turn pink. And that just has to do with the bacteria's cell walls. If it has thin cell walls, the stain will get in and it'll turn the bacterium purple. That's gram-positive. If the cell walls are thicker, it won't get in all the way and it'll only turn pink. And that's important because if the cell walls are thin, they're easy to kill. And if they're thick, they're harder to kill. So how to treat that bacterium, that's something you want to know. And finally, movement. Some bacteria can move. Some of them actually have little propulsion systems, little flagella, little whip-like things on the end. Some of them can actually kind of snake through whatever they're swimming in. Some of them just float. Just float where the current takes them. You know, this is a disease, but like really, that's a tiny percentage. Bacteria are all over the place, right? What goes in that blank? Where are bacteria normally found? Everywhere, like capital E, everywhere. Like there is no place on Earth that you can go that there aren't bacteria, except for a room where all the bacteria have been killed, right? Like purposely, artificially, like radiation and disinfectant and whatever. You can kill all the bacteria in a room, but guess what? As soon as you go in that room, there's bacteria in it. You brought them with you. They're everywhere. They're in the air. They're between you and me right now. They're on your tabletop, all over the place, on your skin, every square centimeter of it. And that's not a bad thing. If you're like thinking you want to go take a shower right now, it's not. It's not like that, right? They're fine. They're not doing anything to you. In fact, thank goodness for them. It's because of them that when you go outside, you're not going to be like hip deep in dead animals. They did that. They recycled those dead animals into, like, you know, good stuff that other critters can use. So that's a good thing that bacteria do. Let's go even bigger than that. You're not here without them. You're not here without bacteria. None of us are. And here's why. What do you live on? Like what keeps you going? What gives you energy? Food. And that food got its energy where ultimately? The sun. Good. So it's really plants that we depend on, right? Except that plants aren't here without bacteria. Because remember the nitrogen cycle? Remember who it is that gets the nitrogen from the gas form in the atmosphere, where most of it is, into living things? It's nitrogen-fixing bacteria. They're the only ones who can do it. They're the only ones who can pry nitrogen gas apart and put it into ammonia and nitrate, which then everybody else, including plants, uses to build two really critical things. It's worth a sticker if you can remember what nitrogen is used to make. Chance.
Is it nitrates and nitrites?
I mean, at first, yes, that's sort of what bacteria turn it into, and then living things get it. But the living things then build something much more useful with that nitrogen. You remember? Either one, and you get the sticker.
I literally have
No, glucose is just, remember, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen? C6H12O6? No, that's just CO2. Where's the nitrogen? Proteins, DNA, and RNA. That's what goes in those blanks. Proteins in one blank, DNA and RNA in the other blank. Those are pretty important to life, right? Can't build them without nitrogen. So we're not here without bacteria. Because plants aren't here without bacteria, and we aren't here without plants. And of course, anything in an ecosystem that's not an apex predator, and bacteria aren't that, is food for something, and bacteria is food for a lot of stuff.
So when like cleaning products say like it tells 99 it's like real.
What do you mean it's not real?
Like it's not just marketing.
Mostly. I mean, but killing 99.9% of bacteria on a slick surface isn't that big a deal, right? Because there's tons of bacteria in the air, they're just going to land on it anyway. So even if they do kill that much, it's a good question. 10 seconds later, there's going to be more on that surface. Yeah, we may end up using a little bit of sterile technique later, but what I was taught in sterile technique, which is when you're working in a lab situation, you don't want any contamination. You've got an open flame near you at all times. to wave your instruments in to kill bacteria. What I was taught is you should 100% of the time be thinking it's raining bacteria. So you don't hold any containers open because bacteria will fall right in. Yeah, they're everywhere. Okay, fine. There's lots of important things that bacteria do. You're thinking, fine, okay, they set us up for life. We're not here without them. But what have they done for me lately? Write that down and let it sink in. So literally inside you, there's more bacteria than there is you. Your body is made of more bacteria, not just a little more, 10 times more bacterial cells than your cells. Now, mass-wise, bacteria are smaller. Bacterial cells are smaller than your cells, so it's probably close to even mass-wise. But still, half you and half bacteria is different than we think of ourselves, isn't it? And it turns out that, like, we used to kind of just think that, there's some bacteria, some in your gut that maybe help you a little bit. We are finding more and more out about how there are connections between the function of your body and the function of the bacteria that live with you. Like, they're not entirely separate from you. In particular, they're learning more and more about how your what we call your microbiome, the bacteria that live in you, are connected to your brain, and possibly even moods and brain function. That healthy bacteria means better brain function. Now, there's also a lot of companies capitalizing on the fact that we don't know a whole lot. So the whole probiotic craze, where you can go see 2 aisles worth of probiotics in the grocery store. Not that good bacteria is not correct. Like, it's good to have good bacteria. Eat a bunch of yogurt and sauerkraut and kimchi. It's good for you. But all those probiotics are of questionable value. That's not especially supported. Yeah.
When a baby's born, do they already have bacteria in them, or does it come later?
Oh, that's such a good question. When they are born, they have much less, but what they have, we're finding out a lot, comes from mom, and in fact comes from the contact that they have with mom's external stuff. And so, like, that's part of why it's a really good thing right after a baby's born for the mom to have it close to her, and they call it, skin to skin contact. Part of that is about transferring good bacteria over to the baby. Yeah, good question. Yeah, cool stuff. But of course, it's always a few bad apples that spoil the bunch, give them a bad reputation. So yeah, a lot of times when we think of bacteria, we think of diseases. It's true. Some of them cause diseases, tiny percentage of what's out there. And really, we're not going to talk a lot about this. Viruses are more fun, and I'm kind of antsy to get to how you fight stuff off, which is pretty interesting. But the reason bacteria can be harmful, there's really 2 angles they take. There are a few bacteria that are really truly out to get you, like they're eating you. Like tuberculosis is bacteria that get in your lungs and actually digest lung cells, and that's not good, obviously. But an awful lot of them just get in you, and you happen to be a nice environment for them, full of water and nutrients. And it's just that them living and reproducing puts off some chemicals that aren't good for you. So, for example, just about all food poisoning is like that. When they get in the food and reproduce, they put off toxins that make you sick. Or they get in you and reproduce in you, they put off toxins that make you sick. And that is probably enough for a Friday. I do have a guided reading for you that I'm going to say is due Tuesday.